Over the course of 10 years, I improved my FTP by 100 watts. So what is FTP? Well, FTP stands for functional threshold power, and in cycling, that's a measurement or an estimate of how much power in watts you could hold for a 1 hour time trial. So there's a number of ways that FTP can be measured. Obviously, the purest way is to do an actual 1 hour all-out time trial. Most people never do this because it's extremely hard to do and it really disrupts your training or racing. A more common way would be to do a 20-minute power test and take an estimate off of that. So that's what I did for a number of years. I would do a 20-minute all-out test, and then you take about 95% of that number, and that's an estimate of your FTP. There's a whole bunch of different protocols. Some people say you need to do a 5-minute all-out power test before doing the 20-minute, or else your number's gonna be too high. And I've even heard protocols of doing like a 4-minute and then a 12-minute test and somehow doing a calculation. But I always just did the 20-minute all-out test and took 95% of that number. And that was from about 2013 to 2017 that I did that protocol. And in the very first one I did in January of 2013, I did 285 watts for 20 minutes, which we estimated as 271 watts for FTP. So after 2017, I was racing all over the world and just really more serious into pro triathlon. So I didn't really do these 20-minute tests because it's just a bit of a disruption to the training. So we ended up coming up with estimates for my FTP based off of performance in races. Most recently, we've estimated the highest power I could hold for a 70.3 bike ride is about 89% of FTP. So in Gulf Coast, I did 331 watts, which results in about a calculation of 372 watts for FTP. This number is kind of an estimate, like I said, but all the methods of FTP are essentially an estimate, and I think it's probably pretty accurate. So an 100 watt improvement is obviously quite a bit. At the beginning of this, when I was 19, when I did that first one, I was in pretty good shape. I trained for triathlon for years, but I wasn't full-time training and I hadn't really gotten too much out of my potential yet. To go from that point to an 100 watt improvement is probably more than what most people would expect, but I definitely think a lot of people could improve by that much from when they're a beginner to when they've been in the sport for a decade. With this 100 watt improvement, the vast majority of that came in the first few years of my training for the sport.
Spin on the mountain bikes. Tomorrow's ride's hard, but today is all easy. How many watts are you doing, Gare?
435.
Sounds about right.
So this is something that I think anyone can relate to. When you first start doing something seriously, you're gonna improve a lot, and I definitely saw this. I went from 285 watts quickly up to over 330 watts for the 20-minute test. And that was really just from doing a couple bike workouts consistently over the course of the winter. It was the first time I'd ever trained in the winter, and I saw huge improvements from that. So after the first few years, it obviously got a lot more difficult for me to improve in cycling. I was definitely still improving slowly, but it really just sort of plateaued. And I think part of that is that I was starting to focus a little bit more on longer distance training. So training for the 70.3s kind of started around that 2016, 2017 mark. And I was improving my endurance without really pushing that high end power or improving my FTP too much. So part of that was I definitely was still improving in cycling. It just didn't quite show in the FTP numbers. But the other thing is I still had a lot to learn. And after a few years of doing the same thing more or less over and over, I needed to find new ways to get motivated in my training. And for me, part of that was realizing that I need to train indoors a little bit more. And that realization didn't kind of come until later, which is why I saw a pretty good improvement over the last few years. So I joined with James Loring, the head coach of LPC, in the fall of 2012. And I've been working with him ever since. A lot of my improvement is due to him and his ability to just know what kind of training is going to work. Largely, I've just followed exactly what he said over the last almost 11 years, and it's worked great.
We did an FTP test 10 or 11 years ago, and he showed some good potential. He was already a fairly strong junior cyclist. And then over the course of the past decade plus, he's really improved his cycling ability and currently one of the stronger cyclists in the pro ranks. In the early days, it wasn't really, let's try to get you biking, at 85 or 90% FTP or at a half iron type intensity for an extended period of time. It was more so, let's just try to raise that ceiling, raise that high end. It was probably around 270 watts the first time he did a traditional 20-minute FTP test. We call it the infamous LPC blind protocol, in which he is on actually that exact blue CompuTrainer lab. It's old. He did all of his FTP tests on that exact trainer just to kind of make it repeatable. We call it the blind protocol because you're not allowed to monitor any metrics at all. We just give various duration updates at certain segments through the 20 minutes, and he has to maintain an aero position. A few factors that probably have gone a long way to help with that big improvement is he does weigh a few pounds more in terms of muscle mass, so that's probably a small factor. His watts per kilo have increased by quite a bit. That 100 watt improvement is roughly a 35% absolute watt improvement. Over time, he in particular has been very, very good at just consistently getting the work done. And he's just chipping away, chipping away, chipping away. And I think that that's really the main reason for the improvement. Where I think he's excelled is that he's also able to hold roughly close to 90% of FTP over a half Ironman distance, whereas before that might have resulted in walking a significant portion of the run or blowing up on the run. But the way that the sport has evolved at the pro ranks is, everyone's getting stronger, and you're having to really be more aggressive on the bike, and then you're asked to hop off and run fast as well. You want to be careful not looking at that number 100 and maybe think of it as percentages, because you got to see obviously what that baseline is, right? So someone that has, say, an FTP of 150, for them to get to 250, well, that would be an unbelievable improvement. But it is possible, because it all depends on where's their background. Maybe their background was fairly minimal, and they can experience some really good fitness gains and strength gains and improvements in their threshold fitness with some good, consistent, smart, progressive training.
So over the course of the last 10 years, my general weekly training plan for cycling hasn't actually changed a whole lot. The basic structure is for me to have 2 solid bike workouts a week where I'm working on interval training, sometimes threshold intervals, sometimes VO2, sometimes even lower end kind of tempo intervals. But it's 2 workouts that are pretty hard, that are roughly 3 hours of total riding, and then another 3-ish rides a week that are just for getting endurance. They're not working too hard and keeping it kind of in zone 1 and zone 2 mostly. So with that weekly training plan structure, I've cycled approximately 9 or 10 hours a week, most weeks. And really, there's not huge jumps or improvements at any given time. It's more just consistently chipping away, and it takes patience, but definitely consistency is far more important than doing like a hero training week or big training camps here or there. So measuring FTP is great, but what we really want is to see how does that translate to racing. So the first time I ever raced with power, in 2015, there was a period of time where I just never put anything in Training Peaks. It was in 2016, and in April of 2016, I did an FTP test that indicated that my FTP should be about 337 watts. Then about 6 weeks later, I did an Olympic distance triathlon where I held 314 watts for an hour, which is approximately 95% of FTP as an estimate. So if you are good in an Olympic distance, you can hold about 95% of your FTP. And that calculation results in about 331 watt FTP. So I was within a few watts of that power test, meaning that I was holding good power for an Olympic distance based on my cycling ability at that time. So this is something that I knew that I was performing well in Olympic distance racing, but then the next year when I moved up to the half distance, I didn't quite seem to be able to translate that power to the 70.3. And I think that was just experience and just not quite having the endurance yet, being still in my early 20s. But for a half, theoretically, you should be able to hold about 85% of your FTP at least as a pro. And in the beginning, I wasn't quite able to do that. So I did notice in several Olympic distance races, I was able to hold about 95% of my FTP, which I was super happy with. Then I did my first 70.3 in March of 2017 in Puerto Rico, and I did 276 watts average. But based on my FTP number at the time, which was around 345 based on a test that we did not too long after, I should have been able to hold closer to 294 watts, so I was a little bit off on that. Still pretty close, but I wasn't quite able to run well off the bike, so I was over biking a little bit. So this indicates that I just didn't quite have the endurance yet to be able to hold that 85% of FTP, which at the time felt like such a crazy difficult thing to do. But as the years progressed, my FTP has improved over the last few years for sure. But the biggest difference in my ability to race well on the bike is that I'm holding a higher percentage of FTP. So remember my most recent FTP estimate of 372, we're basing that off of 89% of FTP for a 70.3 where I did 331 watts. So not only has my FTP improved, but my ability to hold a higher percentage of it has also improved. And this has just resulted in much better bike splits and a lot more of a competitive advantage for me when it comes to the bike in these races. So over all these years, obviously I've had to do a lot of hard bike workouts, and it can be hard to stay motivated at times. But for me with cycling, what keeps it the most fun is a couple different things. One is trying to train with other people, whether that be virtually through a platform like Zwift or riding outside with friends. Regardless of which of these two I choose, usually if we're all doing the same workout and we're kind of in it together, we're doing those intervals together and kind of suffering, even if some people are at a different ability level, it still makes it go by a lot easier. And there's something about that misery loves company that really helps. And the other thing I like to do is if I'm trying to improve my FTP in particular, which is often something I do a little bit further out from the race when I'm just trying to get that high end improved, you want to do intervals that are at or above your current threshold to improve it. It's going to be very difficult to improve your threshold if you're always training in a much lower zone. Obviously, that's very important for endurance and building your aerobic base to do sort of that zone 2 stuff and even zone 3 work. But if you want to improve that threshold, you've got to go up to FTP and above, and sometimes even do VO2 intervals or sprints to really push your body. And then when you get back down to those lower zones, it just feels a little bit easier. So this is going to look different for most people who are age group athletes and not pros. Most people don't have time to bike like 10 hours a week like I do. The key thing is just that consistency. Obviously, you might not have time to do 2 different 3-hour rides per week, but if you can have 2 solid bike workouts where maybe you're only riding for 60 or 90 minutes, but you get some hard intervals in there and you're pushing yourself, that's going to be the key. That consistency will always lead to improvement, and you don't have to do anything heroic. Now, this can work for anybody. I've seen some people who've tried to ride like 15 plus hours a week, but for me, it's really not been crazy mileage. I only ride 9 to 11 hours a week, which for a pro isn't crazy. But I think you can improve your FTP even with much less riding than that. So I think doing some kind of testing for FTP is a great way to have a general idea. Are you improving at your cycling? It's a good way to motivate yourself to try to keep getting that number higher. But I think it's really important to remember that it's not everything, and you can still improve in your racing even if your threshold hasn't improved. Also, I think people kind of get wrapped up in this watts per kilogram number and even at times try to manipulate their weight to get lighter. I really don't think this is a good idea to do intentionally, and my FTP's increased a lot over the years, and I've actually gained weight as time has gone on. And I really don't think that weight, especially for triathletes, is something that you should be trying to control to improve your cycling. Another key thing to remember is that power is not what's going to be measured at the end of the day. What you need is speed to drop your times. A lot of people will try to always hit their power intervals no matter what, and they'll maybe not be in their aero position as much as they should, or they won't work on their aero position, because if you're less aero, sometimes you can produce a little bit more power. But there's definitely a balance there, and I think part of the key is doing some of these workouts outside in an area where you feel confident going at a high speed, so that you just get used to going fast, because ultimately in a race you're trying to go fast and you don't want to be too focused on your numbers. And sometimes if you're in a bit of a plateau with those numbers, you can actually get faster just by improving your aero position or being able to hold your aero position for longer. And that's the beauty of triathlon, is there's all kinds of different ways to improve even if you have a plateau in one area or another. So that's about as much as I can talk about cycling and FTP for one day. Thanks for listening, like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.